Hey internets, if you've been paying attention to social media at all, especially on X, you may have noticed a strange resurgence of feminism. And you may have also noticed that the takes from these feminists are really bad. Ridiculously bad. Unbelievably incoherent, hypocritical, and self-contradictory. Here's just a few examples, and these aren't even cherry-picked, by the way. This is all pretty par for the course. Starting with this one. You act like a man, then watch and learn, and maybe you'll become one too. And I really love this one because it's almost ingenious in its stupidity. Because it's trying to take a jab at gender roles, but it's doing so by insulting the guy by not fitting a weird idea of the male gender role, which means it just contradicts itself. In order for the argument it's making to make sense and actually have the gotcha punch it's trying to make, you'd have to concede that gender roles are in fact valid things that society should care about, even though it's complaining about gender roles. So it's an impressively bad argument, almost as if it's intentionally trying to be bad. But let's look at another one. You can't get a death certificate unless you have a birth certificate, therefore abortion isn't murder. This is one of the best arguments I've heard on this so far. No, it absolutely is not. There are good and bad arguments for abortion rights. There are good and bad arguments against abortion rights. This is by far, in terms of arguments for abortion rights, one of the absolute worst I've ever seen. Nobody, absolutely no body of science, no intellectual institution, or even just no rational human being, absolutely no one defines life by whether or not it's certified. Imagine if you or someone you care about lost their birth certificate and their information somehow got deleted by all of the institutions, meaning that they on paper effectively didn't exist in the system. And then imagine if someone killed them or you. Would that not count as murder because there's no certificate and therefore you're not considered alive? I mean, this is just complete nonsense. Even the most painfully mid-witted bureaucracy enjoyer would probably not try to argue that a person doesn't have any moral right to not be murdered unless they have papers that are signed and notarized and approved by 3 different agencies that says so. It is again almost impressively stupid. It almost leaves you in awe that someone could actually make this kind of argument. So let's look at one more before getting to the point I'm trying to make here. Behold this post. Most men are gay. They're literally gay because they don't really like us women, our natural bodies, and they think it's gross. Blah blah blah, he'd rather spend time with his boys. Blah blah blah, I genuinely think most men are gay, but they haven't figured it out because being gay is like also too feminine for them and they don't like feminine things. And this one just almost takes the cake. It's not even trying to be coherent. So a guy has a man's night out with his buddies, whether it's going to a sports bar or whatever, and that counts as gay because he's spending time with friends, which is of course completely platonic. In order for it to be a gay thing, it needs to be sexual in some way. And everyone kind of knows that. It'd be very bizarre indeed if we sexualized every single interaction with another human being. Which is interesting because usually the over-sexualization of completely normal things is something that feminists tend to complain about rather than tend to support. So not only does it seem like the feminista posters from the early 2010s have suddenly just come back, but they also seem to strangely be dropping the most utterly ridiculous, low IQ, misandrous takes they possibly can. It's almost as if these takes are impossibly bad, or almost as if it's intentionally bad, like the whole thing is fake. And the reason it feels that way, the reason it seems to be fake, is because it almost certainly is. If you look at the locations that these accounts are coming from, you'll notice a strange pattern. Nigeria, India, Nigeria again, Southeast Asia, India, Nigeria, Southeast Asia again, India again, Africa, Southeast Asia again, etc., etc. And yes, all 3 of the trash posts I just went over at the beginning of this video also fall into this pattern. Almost none of these posters actually come from countries that tend to discuss these things, and then of course they're strangely posting in English, despite most of them coming from a place where most people don't speak English, or at the very least it's not their native tongue. Because of course what's going on here is something known as negative engagement farming. These days on the internet, it's not too difficult to get into ad revenue sharing programs on social media platforms, especially on X. But the same thing also exists on YouTube and to some degree TikTok, and even a little bit on the alt-tech sites like Rumble. And the way it usually works is that the more views and the more engagement a post of yours gets, then you will receive a small cut of the ad revenue that is attached to that post or video you made, which on the surface makes complete sense. There's nothing actually really wrong with it as a business model. The problem is that what you see is decided by the algorithm, and the algorithm likes to promote posts that get a lot of engagement. The posts that get people talking, the posts that get people looking at it, the posts that get people replying. replying, all of that tells the algorithm to push the post more, so it suggests it to more viewers. And if it gets enough of this, it'll even show up on the front page. And the problem is that the AI that's used for the algorithms currently can't really tell the difference between negative engagement and positive engagement. It can't tell if people are talking and replying to a post because they like the post or because they're infuriated at how stupid the post is. And as it turns out, especially for people who really aren't that creative, it's a lot easier to get engagement by posting intentionally stupid things than by getting genuine engagement positively by posting intelligent or otherwise creative things that people actually want to see. And so someone who just wants to get some money and doesn't actually care about the content they're making and doesn't actually care about whether they believe what they're saying, or in other words, if they're just a grifter, then the incentives are, especially for a person of low IQ, to of course post intentional nonsense. Post things that get people riled up. Post the crap that gets people to reply to a post, regardless of whether or not that reply is a positive reply. And ordinarily this wouldn't be that big of a deal, because honestly, ad sharing programs, they're not really that much money. For example, I myself have a monetized X account, and occasionally one of my posts will go semi-viral. It'll get 500k or 1 million or something views. And so on average, I get anywhere from about 75 to 250 bucks a month from whatever I just happen to randomly post. It's a nice bonus, but not really enough for me to care so much about that money. Because of course, in the first world, that is of course not a sustainable, livable wage. Unless you're one of the accounts that has 1 million followers or so, consistently getting millions of views on everything you post, you're generally not going to get that much money. But the thing is, to someone living in the third world, especially if they double down on their engagement farming methods with multiple accounts and sock puppets, then they can probably push it to about 500 bucks a month, or even 1,000, which is actually quite good in the third world. For them, that's a living wage. And so that's where all the silliness comes from. They're just posting the crap that they know will get engagement, which then brings us to the question, why on earth do they all seem to be choosing feminism? And you see, that's where things actually get a little bit more interesting. There's thousands of different things they could choose to pretend to be, and that they choose feminism. And that's a question that I believe I, as a philosophy channel, can actually shine a pretty big light on as to why they choose it. You see, in our intellectual institutions, both academia and the media, or the cathedral as it's sometimes called, if you're into Yarvin, feminism is kind of a unique ideology in that it holds a very highly prestigious position, despite not actually being a well fleshed out philosophy. For example, most feminists will claim that they have just kind of a general belief in gender equality, but even many academic level feminists have trouble answering whether that's an equality of opportunity, or equal property rights, or equality as in equity. They don't really have much for an epistemology, and it's extremely rare to see them engage in any kind of real good faith discourse, especially with any of their critics. Rather, instead, feminism again kind of enjoys this uniquely privileged position where it is heavily supported by just about every single media and every single academic institution, despite not actually ever really being expected to actually intellectually defend any of the claims it makes, instead opting to just label anybody who disagrees with them as a misogynist, which has been entirely to their detriment. Because the thing is, when you completely refuse to listen to any kind of criticism at all, what happens is an ideology becomes very easy to poison. It loses any kind of internal check to root out any potential bad ideas that may be sprouting. And that's what makes feminism absolutely perfect for engagement farming. Because if you've ever read through major media feminist blogs like Jezebel, then you would know that sadly and unfortunately, these low IQ takes that these third world engagement farmers are giving out really aren't that much different than some of the takes that actual real feminists have been pushing out. If I, for example, saw a Jezebel article posting pretty much the exact same thing, like for example, this little clip right here, where this engagement farmer from Nigeria is basically trying to argue that men are the ones who are always doing the cheating, that only men are the ones who are disloyal, I could totally see this level of low IQ misandry being unironically repeated on actual mainstream media feminist editorials. It's really not that big of a stretch at all. I mean, it's pretty much what we saw with the bear or man in the woods question. That's just kind of the level of low discourse that most feminists are engaged in these days. And so thus the third world engagement farmers, they've figured out that feminism has kind of an extra bonus level of getting people riled up and infuriated because feminist ideology actually allows for these kind of takes. Feminist ideology for a very long time now has been subject to Poe's law, where without a clear indicator of the author's intent, it is impossible to distinguish a parody of extremist views with a sincere belief or expression of those actual views. Because feminism feminism has basically completely failed to weed misandry out from its ranks. It is almost impossible these days to tell the difference between a genuine feminist activist and someone who is parodying feminism. And the thing is, what we're seeing here is the evolution of Poe's Law. Poe's Law in the age of social media monetization, where the more infuriatingly mid-witted and astroturfed an ideology is, the more attractive it becomes to engagement farmers. A feminist could almost certainly get away with posting any of these memes that are being posted disingenuously by these engagement grifters who probably don't even really believe in feminism, and an academic could have one of these memes up on a projector or something during their lecture at an actual feminist conference hosted by an Ivy League university probably, and I could easily see them getting away with it. Nobody would call them out on the obvious reasoning mistakes that these posts are making, because everybody involved in these institutions kind of knows that anybody who questions feminism, even anybody who just points out something wrong in good faith, will just immediately get dogpiled and falsely accused of being a misogynist. The very harsh truth is that actual real feminist philosophers have not been held to any real academic or intellectual standards for at least the past 30 years. If you were to graph out every single ideology and philosophy that is treated with some level of respect on your average English-speaking university campus, and graph it based on the level of respect it is given in comparison to the intellectual rigor that is required of it, and feminism would stand out as an interesting outlier where you could probably just spew a gish gallop of fallacies as a feminist, and yet the average university professor would be like, yep, clap, 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 that's some good intellectual discussion there, yep, ace dissertation, thesis accepted, PhD candidacy approved. And so engagement grifters who are choosing to pretend to be feminists, they're just jumping on the Grifteminism gravy train. They know that they can rage bait an engagement farm by saying obviously ridiculous and misandrous things, and yet there will be an aura of credibility behind what they're saying, because it's entirely believable that an actual academic feminist would say something like this. And it's certainly believable that a general standard bimbo feminist would say something like this, because I mean, they frequently do. And that makes it the absolute perfect rage bait. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. And if you want to help support my content, which is very much appreciated, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. But for now, that is all. Thanks again for watching. Till next time.